The northern winds carried whispers of old gods as the longship crested the dark waves. Eirik Thorsson stood at the prow, his cloak billowing around him like the wings of a raven. His hair, once golden as the sun, had turned silver with age, and the lines carved upon his face told of many winters survived, many battles won, and many lost. But none of those scars weighed as heavily upon him as the empty space beside him on the ship. Bjorn, his younger brother, taken. Eirik's knuckles whitened as he gripped the hilt of his sword, a blade named Vardr, meaning watcher, forged in the old way with runes etched along its edge. 3 winters ago, Bjorn had sailed west, leading a raid upon the coast of the Saxon lands. But the sea had swallowed his fleet, and those who survived spoke of treachery. Some said Bjorn had been captured, others said worse. But Eirik had not believed in rumors. He had sworn an oath upon his father's grave, before gods and men. He would not die until he brought Bjorn home, or avenged him. Now, as his ship neared the mist-shrouded coast of Northumbria, Eirik's heart burned with resolve. The world had changed since his youth. The Christian kings grew stronger, their armies larger. The old gods were fading, their temples left to rot. But Eirik did not fear the passing of the age. He feared only the weight of a broken promise. That night, they made landfall in secret. Eirik's crew was small, 13 men, all bound by loyalty, all old wolves like himself. They moved silently through the woods beyond the shore, guided by whispers of informants paid in gold and blood. At dawn, they reached their destination, a monastery, tall, stone-walled, surrounded by farmland. But it was not faith that drew Eirik here. It was the man inside. Lord Cedric of Dunwic, an earl known for his ruthlessness in battle and his dealings in slaves. Eirik's sources had been clear. If Bjorn still lived, Cedric would know where. The Viking's eyes narrowed as he studied the walls. They'll expect a raid from the sea. Bjorn, his closest friend, muttered beside him. Eirik's voice was low, rough as gravel. Then we come from the earth. He traced the map they'd stolen, a hidden passage beneath the chapel, once used by monks to flee Norsemen in earlier raids. Now, it would serve another purpose. Under cover of night, they moved through the hidden tunnel, daggers drawn, breath tight in their throats. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of old stone and forgotten prayers. As they emerged inside the monastery's crypt, Eirik felt the weight of the place press upon him. Ancient bones, sacred relics, and a silence deeper than death. But his eyes burned only with one goal: Bjorn. They reached the upper halls swiftly, dispatching guards with cold efficiency. At last, they found Cedric's chamber, ornate, lined with gold and crosses, but empty. Too empty. Eirik's gut twisted. Too late. Then they heard it, a voice from behind. "Well met, old wolf," said a man from the shadows. Lord Cedric himself stood in the doorway, flanked by armored guards. But his sword was still sheathed, his smile calm. "I've been expecting you." Eirik's sword was at Cedric's throat in an instant. "Where's my brother?" he growled. Cedric's smile widened, cruel and cold. "Far from here," he said softly, "but not beyond your reach, if you're bold enough to bargain." Eirik's blade pressed against Cedric's throat, drawing a thin line of blood. Around them, the chamber grew tense. Viking warriors with drawn axes facing Cedric's guards, both sides waiting for the first drop of blood to ignite the storm. But Cedric showed no fear. "Kill me," he said in a low, steady voice, "and your brother dies before dawn." Eirik's eyes burned with fury, but his sword did not move. "Speak," he growled. Cedric's smile returned, sharp as a dagger. "Bjorn lives," he said softly, savoring every word. "In the dungeons of King Aldred of Mercia, far to the south. I sold him for a heavy price. His skill with a blade caught many eyes." Eirik's breath caught. Mercia, a fortress kingdom, known for its harsh laws and cruel rulers. To storm it would be suicide, even for hardened men. Cedric's voice dripped with venomous amusement. "But," he added, "there is a way." Eirik's sword remained steady. "Speak quickly, before I lose patience," he snarled. Cedric's eyes gleamed. "King Aldred seeks a champion," he said, leaning slightly toward Eirik. "An old custom revived, trial by combat. They say the king's halls are cursed, his throne unsteady. He offers freedom to any man who fights in his arena and survives. Eirik's jaw tightened. You would send me into a pit, he muttered. Cedric's grin widened. Win, he said, and your brother walks free. Silence hung thick in the room. Bjorn stepped forward, his voice wary. It's a trap, he warned. Even if you win, they'll never let you leave. But Eirik's gaze remained locked on Cedric. You want something more? Eirik said, his voice low. Cedric's amusement cooled into something darker. I want your ship, he said, and the men aboard it. Bjorn's face twisted in anger. Coward's bargain, he spat. But Cedric ignored him. I will send you south under my banner, he continued, as my guest. You'll fight for the king, and your crew remains here. If you fail, your brother dies. If you win, both of you are free to leave, but your ship and your men stay as my prize. Eirik's heart thundered. It was madness, but it was the only path left, and beyond it, his brother's life. He lowered his sword slowly, never breaking eye contact. Swear it, he said, his voice a quiet storm. Cedric chuckled. I swear, he said, raising a hand. By God, gold and grave. Bjorn grabbed Eirik's arm, his voice fierce. You owe us no such price, he said. But Eirik's reply was soft, steady. I owe him everything. 2 nights later, under Cedric's escort, Eirik rode south, alone. The road stretched endlessly through misty hills and silent villages, each mile drawing him deeper into enemy lands. By the time they reached Mercia, his name was already whispered in the streets. The last Viking, the man who would fight the king's monsters. In the shadow of Aldred's fortress, Eirik dismounted, his cloak heavy with road dust, his sword still strapped to his back. He was led through iron gates into the king's hall, where banners of red and gold hung like dried blood, and nobles watched with cold eyes. At the throne sat Aldred himself. Thin, sharp-faced, his hands jeweled, but his eyes hollow with suspicion. So, the king said, his voice slow and oily. The old wolf comes to my den. Eirik said nothing. Silence was its own blade. Aldred's lips curled. Your brother waits in my dungeon, he said, almost lazily. Fight for me. Win. And I will honor the terms. The crowd murmured, many doubting such mercy from the king. But Eirik only nodded once. I fight at dawn, he said. And with that, the hall erupted in uneasy whispers. Aldred's smile was thin as a knife. Then pray your gods, Northmen, he said softly, for dawn comes quickly. That night, in a cold stone cell, Eirik sat alone. No chains held him, but there were none needed. He had given his freedom willingly. And beyond the walls, in the dungeons below, his brother waited. As the first light of dawn bled into the sky, Eirik rose and whispered his oath again beneath his breath. For Bjorn. Then he stepped into the arena, where the crowds were already roaring. And his fate awaited. The arena was no more than a pit, a circle of sand and stone surrounded by towering walls, where nobles and commoners alike gathered to watch men bleed for sport. But for Eirik Thorsson, it was not a place of spectacle. It was an altar. He stepped onto the sands as the sun rose, his long shadow stretching behind him, his sword Vardr gleaming with a cold, blue sheen beneath the morning light. Silence fell as he entered. Even the loudest voices quieted at the sight of him. The last Viking, silver-haired and scarred, walking toward his fate with steady steps. Above, King Aldred sat upon his gilded throne, his thin lips curling in amusement. Let the trial begin, he declared, his voice echoing across the arena. The gates creaked open. 2 figures emerged from the shadows, mercenaries clad in blackened mail, wielding axes and flails. Killers. Eirik's expression did not change. He had faced worse. The horn sounded. They charged. The first opponent swung his axe in a vicious arc, aiming to cleave Eirik in 2. But Eirik moved with the grace of a predator, sidestepping the blow and driving Vardr upward, slicing through the man's throat in a single stroke. The mercenary crumpled to the sand, choking on his own blood. Gasps filled the arena. The second came faster, his flail whirling, but Eirik caught the chain on his forearm, ignoring the bite of metal. With a roar, he pulled the man forward and slammed the pommel of his sword into his face, shattering bone. Before the man could fall, Eirik buried Vardr in his chest. twisting until the life drained from his eyes. The body collapsed at his feet. Silence reigned. The crowd stared, stunned. Even Aldred's face tightened in surprise. But Eirik remained still, his sword dripping crimson, his breath calm. He turned slowly toward the king, his voice cutting through the stunned quiet. "Is that all?" he asked, his tone like ice. Murmurs spread through the spectators. Fear, awe, disbelief. Aldred's face darkened, but he forced a thin smile. "So eager for death?" the king sneered. He raised a hand. The gates opened again. This time, one man entered, taller, broader, cloaked in wolf pelts, his face hidden behind an iron mask. A champion. The crowd roared at the sight of him. "They call him the Wolf of Mercia," a voice whispered nearby. "No man has survived him." Eirik's heart remained steady. He gripped his sword and stepped forward. The wolf moved like smoke, fast, silent, lethal. Their blades met in a clash that shook the arena. Steel screamed against steel as they traded blows. Eirik's strength against the wolf's speed. The crowd rose to their feet, shouting, gasping, cheering. But Eirik heard none of it. His world narrowed to the rhythm of the fight, every step, every breath, every strike. The wolf's blade grazed his side, drawing blood. Pain burned through him, but he pressed on. He had not crossed oceans and spilled blood to die here. With a fierce cry, Eirik drove the wolf back, striking with a flurry of brutal cuts. Their swords locked again, faces inches apart. And then Eirik saw it. Behind the iron mask, familiar eyes. Blue, fierce, defiant. His heart stopped. It was Bjorn, his brother. Shock rooted him in place. Bjorn's eyes widened, but no words passed between them. Only the flash of recognition, sharp as lightning. The Wolf of Mercia was no stranger. He was the lost son of Thorsson. And now, they stood as enemies, blades locked in a pit of death. Above, Aldred watched with a cruel smile, savoring the unfolding tragedy. "Well played, Northman," he muttered. "But fate always favors kings." Eirik's hands trembled against the hilt of his sword, his mind spiraling. Bjorn, here, alive, but enslaved, forced to fight, masked like a beast for the king's sport. The crowd still roared, oblivious to the truth. Time seemed to slow. Eirik's heart beat once, twice. Then he made his choice. In one swift motion, he tore off his own helmet and let it fall to the sand. He dropped his sword. The arena gasped. Then, without words, he reached up and lifted Bjorn's iron mask. Their eyes met, brother to brother, warrior to warrior. The world held its breath. The arena fell into stunned silence as Eirik pulled the iron mask from Bjorn's face. The younger man's features were gaunt, weathered by years of captivity and war, but his eyes remained the same. Fierce, defiant, alive. Eirik's voice broke the silence, low and rough with emotion. "Brother." Bjorn's lips parted, his breath trembling. "Eirik." Above them, King Aldred's face darkened, his eyes narrowing in rage. "Kill him," Aldred roared, rising from his throne. "Kill him now, or both of you die." The guards began to flood the arena, swords drawn, shields raised. Bjorn's breath quickened, his hands still clutching his sword. But Eirik only shook his head, calm and steady as the sea. "No more," he said, his voice firm. He stepped beside Bjorn, standing tall and unarmed before the advancing soldiers. "You have your spectacle, king," Eirik called, his voice cutting through the chaos. "But you will have no victory here." Bjorn's gaze flickered toward the approaching guards, then back to Eirik. "They'll kill us both," Bjorn muttered. Eirik's eyes glimmered with that old, fierce light. "Then we die as brothers," he said softly, "not as wolves in a pit." Bjorn's hand tightened on his sword. And at that moment, something ancient stirred in the crowd. Whispers rose, first in murmurs, then in shouts. "The wolf is one of them. They are kin. The king has deceived us." Cries of outrage rippled through the arena as the truth spread like wildfire. The spectacle had become a scandal. Some guards hesitated, their steps faltering. And from the edges of the arena, others began to surge forward, not soldiers, but townsfolk, mercenaries, even nobles disgusted by Aldred's cruelty. The crowd turned against the king. In the chaos, Bjorn's voice rang out, loud, clear, commanding. "Stand with us," he shouted, or remain slaves to a coward's rule. It was enough. The guards splintered, some turning on their commanders, others fleeing altogether. The arena erupted into full rebellion. Amidst the storm, Eirik grabbed Bjorn's shoulder, steadying him. "We move now," he growled. Together, they fought their way through the chaos, Eirik with his bare fists and Bjorn wielding his sword like a man born again. They reached the outer gate, where Bjorn and the others were waiting, having seized their chance in the confusion to storm the fortress from within. "You old bastard," Bjorn roared, laughing even through his wounds. "You brought down the whole kingdom." Eirik grinned, bloodied and breathless. "I told you," he said, "this was not the end." They fled the city before dawn, riding hard through the forests, leaving the burning fortress and the fallen king behind. By the time the sun rose, they had reached the shores where their ship still waited, hidden in a secret cove. The sea wind greeted them like an old friend. Bjorn stood at the edge of the shore, staring out at the horizon. Eirik approached, his face weary but peaceful. "You're free," he said. Bjorn's voice was quiet, heavy with all they had lost. "And you?" Bjorn asked. "What do you want now?" Eirik's gaze turned toward the sea. "I want to go home," he said simply. "One last voyage." Bjorn smiled faintly. "Together, then?" Eirik's answer was a soft, steady nod. As the longship sailed once more into the morning mist, the two brothers stood side by side at the prow, scarred, battered, but unbroken. The world had changed. The old gods were fading, and the age of Vikings was ending. But their oath had been fulfilled. And in the sagas yet to be sung, their names would live on, not as raiders, not as slaves, but as brothers.